Safety. This is a question I get asked a lot, and it's important to comment on it, especially if you're going to try and use some of these walkthrough videos to learn from. Hopefully you've had basic gun safety classes before. If you have, or if you haven't, hopefully go have one. But the basic rules of firearm safety are still important even when you bring guns into the armory. And that's to always assume a firearm is loaded. Keep your finger off the trigger unless you're trying to shoot something, and never point the gun at anything or anyone that you aren't willing to kill or destroy. That's the most simplest form of gun safety, because if you're following those rules, you really can't make mistakes. There's a fourth rule when you're shooting that's often taught, which is to remember that bullets continue out the other side and past your target. So you must know the background of your target before you let a shot off. Now, if you think about what's going on in the armory, you might realize that that's an important rule when you're shooting, but if you're in the armory, you really shouldn't be shooting. And that's kind of what the goal of safety becomes in the armory, because at some point you might find yourself literally looking down the barrel of a loaded gun because you have to fix it. And so armorers find themselves in some pretty unpleasant situations with regard to basic safety. And as a result, they have to learn to do some things that most people, as a just standard mode of operating, would never do. This includes, how do you hand someone a loaded gun safely? Now, if you asked any safety instructor, they would simply give you the obvious answer: you don't. There's never a reason to do that. You can put a loaded gun down when you're on the range, pointed down range, and another person can pick it up. But, those are situations where there's fire going around and expected, but, often somebody has to bring a broken gun to you that is still loaded and have a safe way that you can transfer that. So learning to handle loaded firearms and making them safe is a big part of doing this profession, as it were, with any degree of self-preservation in mind, as well as the concern for people around you. So we're going to talk about gun safety in the armory, and just a little bit about the basics that apply everywhere, and then some extra rules that keeps, all 10 fingers, all 10 toes, and all the red goopy bits on the inside. So, basic approach to a firearm that's sitting somewhere is that you've got to figure out whether it's loaded. Now, if this firearm has been here, and I didn't just put it there and didn't take my eyes off it, I have no idea if it's loaded. I don't know how skilled my cats have gotten. They are sinister creatures. Maybe my wife is really mad at me. Who knows? Point is, it's not, I put this here yesterday. I'm now back today. As far as I know, somebody came in and loaded it. They didn't have to have a reason. They didn't even have to know they were doing it. It happened. I have to believe it happened, or I'm not going to be safe. So this is a gun that from outside looks perfectly functional. There's no reason to think that this gun is crippled or disabled in any way. And there's all sorts of things that are bad about this position for this gun. The slide is forward, so maybe there's a round in it. It's got a magazine in it. Maybe it's a full magazine. So what can I tell by observing the gun, and what do I actually know by observing the gun is one of the things that I start with. For one, this gun has a loaded chamber indicator, which, if it was working and there was a round in the chamber, this would be up, and I would have an indication that there was a round in the chamber. Now, as an armorer, I have to assume that part's broken off. and there's a perfectly good round in that chamber, and something is wrong with the loaded chamber indicator. So I can't trust anything about what most people would be able to rely on as hints for the condition. I have to know that the gun is safe. So the first thing we do is keep away from the trigger, and we find the safe direction that we know we can count on. Where this gun is pointing is not an optimal safe direction. I could rail my washing machine if I had to before it found a brick wall. A better direction is actually, in my case, this way, because that wall is made of concrete behind which I am underground. I'm not in a bunker, I'm just in my basement. So that's a safe direction. Concrete, wallboard, and dirt. None of these are going to recoil or ricochet around particularly badly. And nobody's, well, unless there's a hobbit out there, nobody's living in the dirt in my front lawn. So that's my better safe direction. In this case, is what amounts to directly in front of me. The next thing I have to keep out from doing is keep my hand away from the trigger. And I've got an extra advantage in this gun, which I can't rely on completely, but it's helpful. There's a grip safety. So that's something else I can keep my hands away from. So I have no reason to grab this gun by the grip safety, and I have no reason to put my fingers inside the trigger guard until I know what's happening and that I'm safe. So when you want to make sure a firearm is empty, there's essentially two aspects of it. One is to remove any possible source of feed or new bullets, and then to make sure that there's not a bullet in the gun already. So the first one is easy. You remove the magazine. You press the magazine release. You don't have to touch any other part of the gun to do this. Just lift it up enough to get the magazine out, and you remove the magazine. Empty magazine, that's nice, but that doesn't mean that there's not a round in the chamber of this firearm. What it does mean is that there aren't two possible rounds. So the other thing I have to do is actually rack the gun and look inside the barrel. Now we've taken away the source of feed, so the only round that could be in there is actually potentially in the chamber right now. And that's what we have to find out. And we want to do that without pressing the grip safety and without getting our finger in the trigger guard, which means we simply come up low on the gun, so we're only holding it by the end of the grip itself, not where we can engage the safety. We can't do that. Safety mechanisms after safety mechanisms stack up, and they create situations that are non-optimal. In this case, you can't rack this gun if the grip safety is not pressed. It's more of a design flaw than an intentional thing, but it's how it works. So I'm in the case where I have to engage one of the safeties in order to actually do this next step. So I pull it back and I'm looking in the barrel, literally into the chamber, to see that it's empty. Now, if I close it up again, I'm the only one who knows that the gun is safe. It's not that obvious to anyone potentially around me. So if you have to leave a gun lying somewhere while you go get a drink, go to the bathroom, whatever you're doing, it's a courtesy to lock the slide back so that the next guy doesn't have to touch the gun to know that it's safe. The next person in here can come in, peek into the chamber, stick something in the chamber, stick a finger into the magazine well, and know that this gun is safe. There is no source of feed, there is no round in the chamber. They can pick this gun up and essentially do whatever they want with it after having assessed the fact that it is in fact empty before actually having to physically touch it. So that's a nice way to find a gun. So if you're leaving a gun and you have the option of face down or face up, leave it so you can see into the chamber and leave the magazines out. When it comes to armory safety, one of the easiest things in the world to do is simply not have ammunition in the armory. Unless for some reason you have built a firing range into your armory, which I highly recommend not ever doing, there is no reason that a bullet should be in the armory. They show up in the armory when they have come in a firearm and have had to be removed. And they should just be thrown out, disposed of, moved somewhere else, kept off the bench at an absolute minimum. You don't have any reason to have live rounds where you're working. There's just no point. If you need to test things, you use snap caps, dummy rounds of whatever persuasion you like. There's just no reason to create the risk. And I've seen people make safety videos that go over most of these things really well, but then they pan back on their bench and there's a box of rounds, right next to where they're working. And I just don't understand what that could possibly be helpful for. If for some reason you're in a business situation and you need to keep a live gun around your armory to protect you, if you're in a store situation, that's fine. Strap it on your hip. If that gets uncomfortable, mount one under your bench. You don't have to go and leave one of the guns that's sitting on your bench being the one that's hot. If you're like most situations, people will walk in and out of your work area, and you just don't want to create unnecessary risk. So when it comes to handling guns that can't be made safe, the key thing to do is to follow as much of the safety concepts as you can. And the biggest thing involved in that process is to assume that if someone is trying to give you a firearm, that it could just go off. Just pretend there's a round in there that's slow cooking, and that sometime in the next 10 seconds to 10 minutes, it's going to go off, but you don't know when. That's not enough time for you to do anything, but you've got to move that gun somewhere where you have better control, a good backstop in case it eventually does go off, and doesn't actually have any risk of hitting anybody or yourself in the process. And so there are some simple ways. If a gun happens to already be in a holster and someone wants to hand it to you and they'll offer to unload it for you first, you just politely say no and you take the holstered weapon. That protects the trigger at all times from being fired. And when you take the holstered weapon, we're going to use this as our example. I don't have its holster lying around. So if this was in its holster, you simply hold it like this and you carry it vertically. So it's the only thing that can happen should there be a round in here and the gun has some sort of catastrophic failure for no particular reason at that exact moment, that round is going straight into the floor. And that means you don't point it at your own feet and you don't point it out at somebody else's feet or over to the side. You simply keep it pointed in the safest direction that you have as an option. Pointing guns straight up in the air, often done by hunters in the woods, generally not the best idea. Bullets come down, and they come down nearly as hard as they go up. A round going into the ground is almost always a safer option. So take the gun and take control of it, move it to a place where you can create a safe backstop to work against, or that is a safe one, someplace where you have no question about engagement between you and the place where it's not going to recoil. And then you go about making it safe, which is, once again, the same procedure. You're going to have to draw that firearm out of its holster and remove, the magazine's still out of this one, remove the magazine and do whatever minimum it takes to lock that slide back and look in there to see that there's not a round. So this is something that you can do, but that most people are taught not to do, because there's not a good reason to ever do this kind of thing at the range or anywhere else. A person should be able to make their own firearm clear and then present it to you. And but if you're in a work situation and they've brought it in hot and loaded, it's better that you get to take it out. You don't want to rely on the skills and safety awareness of your customers. if you don't absolutely have to. Customers are great, but they're thinking about their problem more than their safety. That's what got them in the car and drove them to your shop in the first place, is because they needed something done, and it's on you. Your safety is on you. So I don't ask customers to unload their own weapons. I just ask them to pull them off with holster or whenever possible, and get the gun into my hands as quickly as possible, and then take it somewhere where I can make it safe. And then back in the armory again, it's the simplest rule in the world. If there's no ammunition in the armory, then you can't have a gun go off in the armory. If there's no ammunition there, it can't go off. The exceptional case is when a gun gets brought back because a live round is in it. And if you do work in this field, you will find this constantly. People slip. And as much as you say that you would never even imagine yourself being able to do some of the crazy things that happens, at some point you have probably put a bullet backward in a magazine backwards. Now, hopefully you did it, halfway while you were loading it, pulled it back out and reseated it, realizing that was not correct. But I have seen it happen. I've seen it happen to some very professional people. I have seen state agents have this problem. Police officers, they're worried about qualifying that day, and this is a time where they get to focus on very little of the procedure and really just passing their hit test for targets, and that's where their head is. And if you take most 9s and even some 40s, and most stack magazines like this, you'll be able to load rounds in the wrong way. There's nothing that tapers so far at the front of the magazine that would prevent a round from going in it backwards. So it's up to you to pay attention to which end is forward. And if for some reason this has gotten lost and a round in there somewhere, whether it's the first one or not, could be the one in the middle is backwards, when that round goes to be chambered, it will get stuck. The force of the gun from the recoil of the previous shot, or just even if they're dropping it by hand, that's a lot of metal moving. It's going to lodge around in there, and it's going to lodge it in there hard. If you're lucky, you'll be able to get at it with a pair of pliers, but there's not a ton of room in a gun where you can't take the slide off. And usually if there's something obstructing the chamber, that's the situation you're going to be in. You're going to get the gun this far apart and no further until you get that round out. And so, you hope that it's not a steel case round, and you've got to be cognizant of what's going on, because in this condition where the slide is locked back, let's say we've removed the magazine, but now there's a round in there backwards, it's still not safe to do a lot of the things that can happen. If the slide drops, it's not going to drop on the primer. The firing pin's not going to hit the primer because the round's in backwards. But it still is creating a forcible shock wave through that bullet. And it's metal to metal to the actual casing, to the primer. It is a percussive charge in there. We like to think that it's only going to go off based on friction, and usually that's how they work. However, it's just bad news, and that also means that the number one obvious way of getting things out of a barrel, which is sticking something down the other end and hitting it really hard with a hammer, not really an option, because in this case, what you're hitting would be the firing pin, or the primer. So safety issues come up all the time, and if anyone ever brings you a revolver for repair that you can't open the cylinder on, no matter what they tell you, there will be at least 5 rounds in the revolver that are unfired. They will swear that 6-shooter is absolutely empty, and those are all just empty brass cartridges in there, no full rounds, that they shot all 6 rounds and then they just couldn't get it open again. I have never in my life encountered a locked cylinder that did not have more than one live round somewhere in that gun. Usually the one right under the hammer as well, which is always exciting. So in those cases, you just keep that thing pointed somewhere safe while you're working on it. You keep away from the business end, and you be careful. And that's the only thing you can do. You can't always follow all the rules, but you got to make sure that if the gun goes off, that it's going to be okay. And so that becomes your safety mantra. It's not that you stop yourself from doing something by keeping your finger off the trigger. You as an armorer have to assume that that gun is on the verge of catastrophic mechanical failure at any time, and it's just simply going to go off. And until you get all of the live rounds out of it, that's how you operate. You don't stand in front of it. You don't let it get pointed anywhere but at the ground or wherever your safe backstop is. And you work around it. You keep that path, that bullet path in mind, and you don't walk across it. You don't let other people walk across it. And that's how you treat it until you've made the gun truly safe again. So as an armorer, you don't get to necessarily have all the luxuries of folks on the range and the nice clean rules. Sometimes you've got to keep your mind focused on the safety and assume that the gun isn't going to help you one bit in this effort. That's why the guns are coming to you in the first place, is there's something wrong with them. So anyway, that's safety, and keep that in mind at all times, and you'll be happier. And again, the best rule in the world is simply never clean your gun anywhere near ammunition. Wherever your ammo is, be somewhere else. You and your gun, when it's time to clean it or fix it or whatever you're doing, just no ammo anywhere near it. Beyond arm's reach, at an absolute minimum, best to just not have it in the room. That way you keep all the digits. That's all.